Well, hey there, Year 12s. Today we're going to be exploring the police state. We've looked at Hitler's rise to power, and now it's time for us to look at how he managed to consolidate his regime, consolidate his own power, and essentially gain full control over the German society. So if we have a look at this meme, because as you know, I love a good meme, today's forecast will be rain with a strong chance of hail. And so, with that in mind, let's have a look at the next part. Assignment 2 is all about this question, or more to the point, this statement, this proposition. Dictators manage to seize control over all of society. How accurate is this statement? And you're going to find that this comes up again and again as we prepare for the exam. You're going to be given a statement, and you need to decide how much you actually agree with that particular statement. And in every good essay, in every essay that gets itself the A grade, according to the SACE board, you need to both explore what is true about that statement and also what isn't true. It's called developing a counter-argument. And so, as we have a look at this statement, dictators manage to seize control over all of society. The all part is the bit that we're going to be arguing about. Whether Hitler managed to gain control of every aspect of German society or not. And so that's the key thing that I want us to keep in mind as we explore this content and we try and work out whether Hitler actually had control over every single part of society, or whether perhaps there were some parts that Hitler did not have control over. Because if that is true, if there were some aspects, and I apologize for my itchy nose, we need to explore the idea that Hitler maybe didn't have control over all of Nazi Germany. So how might he have gone about doing this? Well, obviously, you could have a look at the aims, the methods, and the appeal of the Nazi movement, which resulted in the move from this political fringe, this party sitting on the outside, to actually becoming the government. We could have a look at the consolidation of power and the creation and consolidation of the totalitarian state. Now, totalitarian is just a fancy word for Hitler having control as dictator. For Hitler having total control, that's where the total part comes from, that word, having complete control over everything that was happening in Germany. Another way that Hitler might have done this is through the experience of the Nazi movement for people and for groups, including women, and also for those who resisted the Nazis within Germany. And this will include, of course, the anti-Semitism or the anti-Jewish sentiment that swept across Germany. The last way that we can examine this is the impact of the Second World War on Germany as a nation and the German people, and we can explore whether Hitler managed to maintain full control as the war progressed. So in task 2, in the essay that you write, really you've got a whole wealth of information that you can talk about, but we're mainly looking at this period between 1933 and 1939. You're more than welcome to explore what took place during the war, but I think most of what you want to be able to talk about will have taken place between 1933 and 1939. So, that in mind, let's have a look at the police state. If you can see that image in the background there, having a look at some communists who were arrested in 1933. What a good time to be a communist, hey? So, the Nazis had wanted to control every aspect of German life, and they used this policy of, and I apologize if I get this pronounced wrong, Gleichschaltung, in order to achieve this. Now, this process of Gleichschaltung, we'll use the English translation, shall we? The process of Nazification. There's this idea that the Nazis would have control, and they would be coordinating every aspect of society, from the economy and trade associations to the media, to culture and education. And we'll explore some of those in more detail in some other videos. But if this indoctrination, if spreading the ideas of the Nazis, if it didn't work, then force and terror were going to have to be used. So the Nazis used their own organizations to instill fear into the people through the SS, the SD, or otherwise known as the Security Service, or the Sicherheitsdienste. Again, this is why we use the acronyms, and the Gestapo. They were the main ones. And in 1936, they were all brought under the control of a man called Heinrich Himmler. Let's have a look at Heinrich Himmler. He lived for 45 years, from 1900 to 1945. He was the man who was responsible for setting up Dachau in 1933, the first concentration camp. And before that, he had been part of the beer hall putsch in Munich. He'd been there with Hitler in 1923. In 1929, he'd been appointed the leader of the SS. He was the guy who had organised the Night of the Long Knives. And so when he becomes the head of all the police agencies in 1936, he's now reached a pretty high point within the Nazi Party. He was obsessed with racial purity in Germany, and he encouraged Aryan breeding programs. The idea that all of these racially pure Germans would breed together, and they wouldn't make the blood of the Aryans impure by marrying Jews or marrying anyone else from outside Europe, and really making a mess of the German blood. After invading Poland at the start of World War II, Himmler was given total control of the annexed parts of Poland. And in 1943, Hitler would appoint Himmler as Minister of the Interior, and he would oversee what became known as the Final Solution, the mass killing of the Jews. And so, as the war would progress to its conclusion, when Germany's defeat seemed imminent, Hitler tried to make attempts to negotiate with the Allies, and Hitler found out about this. He was furious, and so he took back all of the offices, all of the roles that Himmler had. Once Germany had surrendered, obviously after Hitler's death, Himmler tried to escape. He tried to take on a false identity, but he was arrested, and while he was in custody on May the 23rd, 1945, he would end up committing suicide. So he would face the same fate as Hitler, unless, of course, you believe that Hitler did survive and make his way to South America. Maybe that's something we can explore in the future. But one of the groups Himmler was in charge of was the SS, or the Schutzstaffel. We've talked about these guys previously. Formed in 1925, they were originally a bodyguard unit for Hitler, and they had a clear, visible identity. So if you have a look at the images here, to the left, you've got the black uniform, you've got the SS there on their collar, and again on their helmets, the full black uniform, the swastika on the left arm, with and without the hat. And of course, if you have a look at him without the hat there, the blonde hair, if we could look closer, he'd have the blue eyes, the perfect Aryan. And, doesn't he just look sublime, really? These guys would show absolute total obedience to the Führer, as opposed to the SA, who previously had divided loyalties between Röhm and Hitler, of course. And so, in 1934, there were 50,000 of them. They were expected to be fine examples of the Aryan race, and then they were expected to marry racially pure wives. So you've got these perfect Germans marrying perfect German wives, and of course they were going to have perfect German babies, just what Hitler wants. So after the Night of Long Knives, they become responsible for the removal of all opposition within Germany. And then within the SS, there was a group called the SD, or the Security Service, and their task was to maintain security within the party, within the Nazi Party itself, and then the country. So it's almost like they play an internal affairs sort of role, kind of like what would have been needed to make sure that Röhm was being loyal to Hitler. And so that's why that was introduced after the Night of the Long Knives. Now here we have an extract from a book on Nazism, which was written in 1974, so well after the Nazi regime had come to its end. But in it, this book writes, Hitler needed an organization which would not feel restrained by the law. It would act with utter ruthlessness and would be dedicated to expressing his will and the ideas of the Nazi movement. He found what he needed in the SS. Pretty powerful words. The SS really were able to do what they needed to do in order to preserve Hitler's rule, and I guess that's the important thing to note here. The other group that we have is the Gestapo, or if you really want to get fancy, you can have a crack at pronouncing this word, the Geheime Staatspolizei, or the Secret State Police. Again set up in 1933 by Goering, and in 1936 it would come under control of Himmler and the SS. In 1939, the Gestapo was the most important police section of the Nazi state, so they could essentially arrest and then imprison anyone suspected of opposing the state, of opposing Nazi rule. And the most likely place that people who opposed the rule of the Nazis, where they would end up, would be a concentration camp. So we need to keep in mind that concentration camps were initially used for those who went against or opposed the state. Really important that we keep that in mind. And by 1939, there were about 160,000 people under arrest for political crimes. Let's just have a look at how the Gestapo works. This is a report that came from the Rhineland in July of 1938. In a cafe, a 16-year-old woman, 16-year-old? Wow, I can really read. A 64-year-old woman, rather, remarked to her companion at the table, they're just going for a little coffee, having a little chat, and she makes a comment, probably quite flippantly, Mussolini has more political sense in one of his boots than Hitler has in his brain. Fair enough, nice little joke, but the remark is overheard, and 5 minutes later, the woman is arrested by the Gestapo, who had been alerted by telephone. So somebody sitting at a nearby table has heard this woman make this comment about Hitler. It's against what Hitler would want people to be saying about him, and it's been said in public. So this person gets on the phone, calls the Gestapo, 5 minutes later they're there and they arrest the woman. Where would she be headed? Well, most likely the concentration camps. And why is that the case? Well, we can blame the legal system for this. So, even though the Nazis controlled the Reichstag and they could make all the laws that they wanted to, Hitler wanted to make sure that all of the laws that were made were interpreted in a Nazi fashion. And so the law courts, just like every other part of life, they had to experience this Gleichschaltung, or this Nazification. So some judges got removed, but everyone who remained had to become members of the National Socialist League for the Maintenance of Law. And so this group would ensure that the Nazi views were upheld in the courts. In October 1933, the German Lawyers' Front was established. There were more than 10,000 members of this Lawyers' Front by the end of the year. In the following year, 1934, a new People's Court was established. No, not like People's Court on Channel 9, not the Judge Judy, look-alike show. A People's Court established to try cases of treason. Now, the judges who presided over these cases, like the dudes in these pictures here, were loyal Nazis. So they're probably going to, ensure that the Nazi views are upheld. Judges knew that the Minister of Justice would check to see if they had been lenient, and sometimes, which I find quite staggering, Hitler would stick his nose into the business of the legal system. He would alter sentences. He would alter the sentence if he felt that the judges had been too soft. And so Hitler himself takes on this position of judge, juror, and executioner, I suppose. And by the end of 1934, Hitler controlled the Reichstag, he controlled the army, and now he controls the legal system. And so you've got the Nazi police and these security organizations that have wormed their way into the fabric of society, and it's now almost impossible for anyone to escape the power and the grip of the Nazis. We have a look here, an explanation of the judge's role put forward by a Nazi legal expert in 1936. This is the role of the judge. The judge is to safeguard the order of the racial community, to prosecute all acts harmful to the community, and to arbitrate in disagreements. And this is what I find most interesting. The National Socialist ideology, especially as expressed in the party program and in speeches of our Führer, is the basis for interpreting legal sources. So, how do we go about interpreting the laws? Well, how well does it match up with the 25-point program of the Nazis? How well does it match up with the speeches of the Führer? Essentially, what the Führer wants, he's going to get. And if you have committed treason, if you have said the wrong thing, like that lady in the cafe, depending on what Hitler has said, or what is in the 25-point program, that's how your punishment is going to be worked out. And if we have a look down the bottom, a decree for the protection of the nationalist movement against malicious attacks upon the government. This was very early on in Hitler's regime, March 1933. Whoever purposely makes or circulates a statement of a factual nature, which is grossly exaggerated, or which may seriously harm the welfare of the Reich, is to be punished with imprisonment of up to 2 years. So make an exaggeration of a claim, and someone hears it. You're off for 2 years in prison. Interesting. They're trying to clamp down. They're trying to control the types of things that people say about the Nazi Party, ultimately to silence the critics, to silence the doubters, and basically to ensure that everybody is supporting the Nazis, whether by word or in deed. There was a law that attempted to be passed in 1935 that went a little bit like this. National Socialism considers every attack on the welfare of the national community as wrong. In future, therefore, wrong may be committed in Germany even in cases where there is no law against what is being done. So people might consider that if there is no law, well, that looks wrong, so we should make a law, and then that person can get in trouble for something that they did, even though there was no law against what they did at that time. The lawmaker, the justification for that, is that the lawmaker cannot give a complete set of rules covering all situations which may occur in life. He therefore entrusts the judge with filling in the remaining gaps. Interesting. Interesting that the judge, Hitler, well, they're all thinking the same thing because they've all experienced that Nazification. And so where there is no law, well, the judge has the opportunity to create that law should he need to do it. He can fill in the gaps, as it were. Let's have a bit of a look at concentration camps. Now let's say that 64-year-old got sent there. Here we have a nice little map. The SA and the SS, they were the ones who ran these new prisons called concentration camps. The earliest, 1933 in Dachau, which is right near Munich here. And others followed. We've got Buchenwald, we've got Flossenburg, must be the dentist's camp. That's a little joke there for all of you playing along at home. Bergen-Belsen, Ravensbrück. Okay, and then obviously once the war gets started, we're going to have camps in Auschwitz, etc. But prisoners were classified into different categories, each denoted by a different coloured triangle worn by the prisoners. Before we have a look at those colours, I want you to take note of where these camps are situated. Notice that most of the camps here are situated right near one of the major cities in Germany. And so where you're going to have the most opposition is probably going to be in Berlin or in Munich, in Nuremberg, in Weimar or in Hamburg. And so to have these camps really close by sends a message that, you know, if you put your foot out of line, that's where you're going to be sent. And so that would have been quite a large deterrent for many people. And so here we have the different categories of prisoners. First of all, we've got the political prisoners, so the communists, members of other political parties, the trade union leaders, so they've got the red colour there. In the pink, we have the sexual offenders. The grey, I like the way that they name this category, the work shy, the ones who aren't really keen to work. Anyone unwilling to work, including gypsies, vagabonds, the tramps, the alcoholics. In the purple, the religious groups known as the Bibelsfolker or the Bible bashers. So that included the Catholics and the Protestants who opposed the Nazi regime. We have in the blue the non-German ethnic groups who were seen as a threat to the Nazi regime. You've got your normal, everyday criminals, you know, including your burglars and your thieves in the green, and then of course in the yellow we have the Jews who were fairly regularly rounded up, but obviously in much greater numbers after Kristallnacht, and we'll get to that when we have a look at the experiences of the Jews in Nazi Germany. So why use the camps? I mean, opponents of the regime were taken to camps for questioning, they were taken there for torture, they were taken there for hard labour, and they were often treated with great brutality. If someone was killed at a concentration camp, family members would receive a note saying that the inmate had died of a disease or been shot trying to escape, not the actual reason why they had been killed or why they were dead. Interesting. Very few survived the experience of the camps, and the prisoners themselves were used as slave labour, especially for extracting raw materials and also for manufacturing weapons. Here we have an excerpt of someone who did survive the camp, describing his journey and arrival at Sachsenhausen concentration camp in 1934. He says, "One particular incident I recall like it was yesterday. An old gentleman with the name of Solomon I'll never forget. He must have been well in his 70s. He simply couldn't run. He couldn't run and he collapsed and he laid in the road and one of the stormtroopers stepped on his throat. This is true. Unbelievable, but true, till the man was dead. We had to pick up his body and throw him to the side of the road, and we continued on into the camp where we was assembled in a courtyard, and a strange incident happened at that time. We faced a barrack, a door on the right and a door on the left. People went in the left door, came out the right door, entirely different people. Their hair was shaven off. They had a prisoner's uniform on, a very wide striped uniform. My number was 6199. And I guess that's something to consider here, that these people who ended up in the camps had their humanity stripped off them. They were no longer people. They were no longer Edward and Solomon. They were just a number. No hair. In the pajamas. In the uniform. 6199. Pretty harrowing stuff. Here we have the prisoners arriving before they go in. The one door and come out. Completely different people. Here they still have their individuality. But when they come out the other side of that door, they won't. Lastly, I want us to have a quick look at the persecution of religious groups. Here you have some Catholic priests giving Hitler the old Hail Hitler wave. Something to keep in mind is that the Nazi ideals were quite opposed to the beliefs and the values of the Christian Church. I mean, obviously, Nazism glorifies strength and violence, whereas Christianity teaches love and forgiveness. Nazism, they despise people who are weak. In Christianity, the idea is that you help the weak. Nazis believe in racial superiority. Christians, well, we respect all people, they would say. Nazis see Hitler as this godlike figure, whereas Christians wouldn't see Hitler the same way. They would believe in God and believe in Jesus as well. So, Hitler couldn't straight away start to persecute the church because Christianity was essentially the official religion of Germans. Almost 2/3 of the population was Protestant, and most of those Protestants lived in the north. About 1/3 of the country was Catholic, and most of them lived in the south. And so, when Hitler comes to power in 1933, he does see the Catholic Church as a threat to his Nazi state. Why? Well, Catholics owe their allegiance, firstly, not to Hitler, but to the Pope. So, in Hitler's mind, they've got divided loyalties. Also, Catholic schools and youth organisations, their message was at odds with that of the Nazi Party, and the Catholics quite often supported the Centre Party, the party that von Papen, for example, had been the leader of when he was Chancellor. And Hitler intended to remove this party and, in the end, get rid of all political parties. So at first, Hitler tried to work with the Catholic Church. In July 1933, he signed a concordat, or an agreement, with the Pope. And the Pope agreed that the Catholic Church would stay out of politics if Hitler agreed not to interfere with the Church. But within a few months, Hitler had broken this agreement. Priests are harassed or attacked. Many of them criticized the Nazis, and, well, they ended up in the concentration camps. Catholic schools, they were interfered with, they were eventually abolished. Catholic youth movements closed down, as were the monasteries. The Protestant Church didn't fare much differently. There were some Protestants who admired Hitler, and they were called German Christians. But there were many who opposed Nazism, who, again, like the Catholics, believed that the Nazi way of life conflicted greatly with their own beliefs. They were led mostly by Pastor Martin Niemöller, who had fought in World War I as a submarine commander in 1933. And the name of this is certainly wouldn't have made Hitler or the Gestapo go, what's going on here? They called their emergency league the Pastors' Emergency League for those who oppose Hitler. Wouldn't bring up any suspicion at all. In the following year, they set up their own confessional church. Niemöller is arrested in 1937, sent to a concentration camp, and the confessional church was banned. Lastly, I just want to finish with this. October 27, 1928. So before Hitler comes to power, he's still leader of the Nazi Party, of course. But he says this: "We tolerate no one in our ranks who attacks the ideas of Christianity. Our movement is Christian." Now, if Hitler did indeed say this, what does that say about him? Is what we see him do post-1933, is that in any way similar, or does it work with what we see here in this quote? It's something for us to think about as we keep exploring the way that Hitler managed to gain control, where he said what he needed to in order to gain the power that he desired. So what I want you to do is to make sure you've finished off the Google form. Make sure you press submit so that I can have a look at just how well you've managed to follow along with this video, and then you can get on and have a look at the next one: censorship and propaganda.